Okay, we're good to go. Hi everyone. Thanks for joining Daytona Office Hours, as always, where we go through the releases from last week, take a look at what's coming up, and talk about Daytona in general, and have an open floor for questions. So let me just share my screen for a sec. That's it. I'll zoom in a bit. Yeah, that should be fine. Okay. So the release that happened last week was version 0.31.0, and that was released on Friday, if I'm not mistaken. Apologies. So the release actually had quite a number of features. So the first feature was support for JetBrains Fleet ID. So just as with any other JetBrains ID, now you can use Daytona to open projects inside Fleet. The difference with Fleet is that actually that Fleet is not opened through the JetBrains Gateway, but actually similarly to VS Code, we just simply invoke the Fleet CLI, and then the Fleet ID takes over, installs itself on the remote machine and on the remote container or local container, and then connects you to the instance. So JetBrains Fleet is basically one of the lightest JetBrains IDs, so it doesn't go through the gateway itself. Then we have filter param Daytona Create TUI. Apologies, let me just mute my notifications. Sorry. So filter param Daytona Create TUI. So that's a feature contributed by Abyshek. So the feature is regarding the filter parameter on Daytona Create. So when I run Daytona Create, 1 second, let me get this up. Okay, let's close this. So when I run, actually, sorry, let me just increase my font size. First font size. Sorry. Yeah. So when I do Daytona serve first, Daytona serve, and then let's not update CSH currently, and then let's run Daytona Create. It's still booting up. Let's just give it a sec to wake up. So yeah, it's always the slowest when I'm demoing something. That's just how it goes. Okay, so it's registering providers. Okay, that's up. So let's do Daytona Create, and then let's try, for example, GitHub. Now you can see the actual filter param right here in the Create TUI. This is simply a convenience, let's say, UX candy, so you don't, for example, forget which filter param or which breadcrumb you're at. So, for example, if I do Daytona.io, I'll get GitHub Daytona.io, and then, for example, Daytona, I'll get the full path here, and then on the screen, I know I'm actually creating Daytona, a project from Daytona. Okay, it seems that we have a bug. Ivan, take note, please. I actually exited with Control-C from that TUI, but it actually continued on. We'll take care of that in the next release. Okay. Moving on, so we have a spinner for workspace start, stop, and delete. So this is just a simple TUI spinner that lets the user know that something is happening while workspaces are being started, stopped, and deleted. Then we have support for Gitea webhook, Gitea webhook pre-builds by Unsuman. So this is basically another Git provider that now supports pre-builds. So you can automatically configure webhooks through Daytona to actually pre-build all your projects that are hosted on any Gitea installation. So either self-hosted or Codeberg. So then you have suggest adding a target after provider install by me, actually. So this is simply just a prompt for the user to add a target after installing a provider, a simple convenience, so they don't have to run 2 commands when installing a provider. Then we have, add JetBrains Gateway installation check by Tarun. So this, as with all of our other IDs, for example, Fleet and VS Code and Cursor, where we have a check for the ID. Is it installed on the user system? Now we have a check for the JetBrains Gateway as well. And if it's not installed, the user will be prompted to that we will actually print out some instructions on how to install Gateway. And lastly, the last feature of this release was add autocomplete functionality to input fields by Brian's Go. So this was actually a feature we requested a long time ago, actually suggested on the issues a long time ago. And it's primarily a feature that will be used by, or that is already maybe used by some providers. So for example, apologies, a dog barking near me. Providers that have some inputs that have let's say a list of suggestions. So for example, DigitalOcean disk images or VM instances or regions, for example, they will now have autocomplete suggestions inside the inside that particular input field. Then we have SSH access with remote profiles fixed by me. So this is just a fix when you use local workspaces, but with a remote profile. So as you know, when you connect to a remote server, local workspaces are actually spun up on that server. And then when accessing them, this was actually a regression introduced also by me when we sped up the actual SSH access process for all projects. And lastly, the last fix of this release was Daytona info uncommitted changes warning on first create. So this was actually committed by Brian's Go. It was simply an update to our Git library that we use in Go, which had a bug before, and now we fixed it by just upgrading the version. Okay, that's it for 0310. We also had a release yesterday. It was 0320. It was more of a modest release now. Only 3 features, 1 fix. The features were entry point execution for workspace image. So if you notice, maybe when you build a image from a dev container, it will add a lot of metadata about the dev container config itself, including some entry points for the features you might have. So for example, when you include Docker in Docker feature, actually not Docker in Docker, but just Docker, as a feature of the dev container, it will add an entry point to as a label that says, okay, you need to run Docker-D with this installation, with this script inside a container, and now we support that as well. And this feature actually required all providers to be updated because it touched upon the Docker library, Docker package inside Daytona, sorry. Then the second feature was support for popular programming languages by Vedran, our CTO. So we just added support for a bunch of languages in our default project image. Sorry, just a sec, let me enter it and we can go through the list. So now we support natively, let's say we support Go, Node, .NET, Ruby, Rust, PHP, Python, Java, TypeScript, Nix, and this is just a feature that installs the dev container CLI. So all these languages are now available by default in the default project image. And that's it. That's simple. Let's say UX feature again, so users don't have to install the languages themselves when they want to, let's say, quickly get started on a project. Lastly, we have a Daytona config command by our colleague Luca. So this is a new command for Daytona. So now when you run Daytona config or actually Daytona CFG, you can get the prettified version of the Daytona output, and also you can do Daytona CFG, let's say FJSON, and it will actually print out the JSON version. So you don't have to look for the file itself, and then maybe and then maybe open it in VS Code or any other editor. You can just run Daytona config and view the entire output. Also, if we check out the help command of config, you'll see that you have a flag show API keys that will actually show your API keys in the output, because in its default setting, it won't show the API keys because that could be potentially very bad if you accidentally, for example, like me, share a screen and then share API keys. I would have to nuke my server to just to be safe. Okay, and then we have one fix. Yeah, exactly. So one fix by Luca again. This fix is to wrap branch name arguments into quotation marks. So for example, if you have a branch on Git that starts with a hashtag, when you run Daytona, or when you run git clone -- branch and then branch name, the hashtag would actually be interpreted as a comment, so the clone process would fail. And now we simply just wrap the entire branch name with quotation marks to kind of escape the actual branch name. Okay, that's it. And as the notes say, because these two PRs influence our providers, you can just simply update them with Daytona provider update -- all, and it will automatically update all the providers you have installed. Okay, that's it from the last two releases of this week and last week. Now let's check out some of the open issues, or actually let's take a look at some of the open PRs. I made a fix for dev container command definition. So our colleague Luca opened an issue a few weeks ago that is actually, let's say, apparent when you do Daytona Create in our Docker provider. It just was a, let's say, mistake in defining the dev container configuration structure in Go, and I simply fixed it by introducing a new command type, which is simply an interface, because the commands in dev container can be either an array, string, or an object. So this now covers all the bases. Then we have had support for Azure DevOps pre-built webhook. So hopefully in the next release, we will have pre-built support for Azure DevOps as well. Then we have an interesting PR, which is display unpushed commits with detailed status and format. So hopefully with this, with the next release, when you do Daytona info or after Daytona creates, you can get an input, you can get an output of how many commits are actually not pushed to your Git repository. So you can just really quickly check if you have some unpushed commits to maybe then enter the workspace and push the actual code. Apologies. Then we have fetching logs for start and stop command. So this is a PR that attempts to actually show workspace start and stop logs while starting and stopping a workspace. Then we have actually a similar PR for a number of unpushed commits. Then actually a nice quality of life change or refactor to HTTP status codes and error in the API, and more concretely the Git, everything related to our Git providers. So if a request to a Git provider fails with some HTTP code, now we will actually forward that HTTP code to the client, and we won't, let's say, ignore it as we did before. And as I mentioned in the last office hours, we have a big PR coming up regarding multiple profile support for Git providers, and hopefully we can get that over the finish line real soon. Regarding some open issues, we had, okay, this is actually an issue created 2 minutes ago. We can actually look through it live. So terminal remains interactive during logging process and workspace project creation. Okay, we have a screencast here during the creation of the workspace project. Okay, attempts to input text about the logging parameter. Okay, this is actually an interesting, it's something we can do. So basically, yeah, we can just disable the input while the workspace is being created, so the user doesn't interfere with the logs. This is actually a very cool idea. I'll definitely like this and check it out more after the recording. Then regarding some of the, let's say, bigger issues we have here. So for example, this would be a nice quality of life change. So when you do Daytona code with VS Code or Cursor, we should maybe auto install the remote SSH extension, which is actually a requirement for Daytona. Then a feature request by Nico, which will be a bit difficult to implement, actually, not difficult, but require a bit more effort, is to actually enable output viewing for the post attach command in Daytona. So when you have a post attach command in dev container, it will run once you attach your ID to it. And it would be cool if the user can actually view the logs of the command while inside a workspace. Then finally, maybe one more issue is Daytona restart workspace. We can just implement a command that will stop and start the workspace simultaneously, actually in one command, without the user having to run two separate commands. That would be a really nice addition to Daytona. So I think that's it. If anyone has any questions, feel free to stop me as always. If not, that's it with Daytona Office Hours. Thanks for being here as always, and catch you all again next week.